Hello and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Village Diary by Miss Reed. Mr. Arnold, one of Her Majesty's inspectors, spent most of the day with us. This is his second visit to Fairacre School. His first one was brought to an abrupt close by a violent thunderstorm last summer when we had to get the children home as best we could by various means. The vicar, I remember, stuffed a record number into his car that afternoon, and the old golfing umbrella that lives in the corner cupboard with the maps had bobbed its way through the downpour with the Tyler's Row contingent. He remembered Mrs. Annett, Miss Gray as she had been when he last visited the infants' room, and said that she appeared to have done an excellent job with the younger children, but didn't I feel that the reading was being pushed a little too hard? He put this point with the utmost delicacy, suggesting that perhaps Miss Clare was the person who was taking this subject a trifle too seriously, but I told him at once that this fault, if indeed it were a fault, was of my making. This led us to a most agreeable and stimulating argument about children's reading. Mr. Arnold sat inelegantly on the front desk with his back to the class. Poor Patrick meekly wrote up his nature notes on the 6 square inches of desk lid which were not occupied by Mr. Arnold's well-cut Lovett tweed trousers. I sat at my desk and we argued over the massive brass and oak inkstand. He maintained that children are not ready to read before the age of 6 or even 7, and that all sorts of nervous tensions and eye strain can be set up by too much emphasis on early reading. I maintain that each child should go at its own rate, and that the modern tendency is to go at the rate of the slowest member of the reading group, and that this is wrong. There are, to my mind, far more bright children being bored and very frustrated because they are not getting on fast enough with their reading than there are slow ones who are being harmed by too rapid progress. I have known several children, I was one myself, who could read enough simply written stories to amuse themselves at the age of 4½ to 5. We were not forced, but it was just one of those things we could do easily, and the advantages were enormous. In the first place, we could amuse ourselves, and reading also gave us a quiet and relaxed time for recovering from the violent activity which is the usual 5-year-old's way of passing the time. Secondly, the amount of general knowledge we unconsciously imbibed stood us in good stead in later years. Today, with the 11+ examination to face, this is particularly pertinent. Incidentally, I have known children who have come to reading so late in the primary school that they have found real difficulty in reading the questions, let alone knowing enough to answer them. Even more important, the early poems and rhymes, read and learnt so easily at this stage, have been a constant and abiding joy. Thirdly, the wealth of literature written and presented expressly for the 4 to 6 age group, the Beatrix Potter books are the first that spring to mind, can be used, loved, and treasured to such an extent that is not possible to a late reader. The children who has never been taught until the age of 7 or 8 has missed the thrill of discovering a vast number of attractive books. He is beginning to want fairy stories, adventures, legends, and so on, which may be in language still too difficult for his retarded mechanics of reading. The battle raged with great zest. I have never overworked a child in my life, I insisted. It always seems to me to be a most difficult thing to accomplish anyway. Natural resistance to learning is remarkably resilient. There are some here who will never be able to read with ease, but broadly speaking, I expect the average child to be able to read well enough to amuse and instruct himself by the time he is 8. And if he can't, then he is probably below average and will need a little extra encouragement. And if I get the odd infant who can rattle away at 5, why then good luck to him. And all the books in Fairacre School, and in Fairacre Schoolhouse for that matter, are at his disposal. Mr. Arnold twinkled and said I was a renegade, but he must admit he had seen no cases of nervous disorders in my school. And after school, he, Miss Clare, and I enjoyed a cup of tea in my garden among the apple blossom with the greatest goodwill, each knowing that he would never convert the other, but content to let it be so. Earl and Eric have struck up a strong friendship and are quite inseparable. It dates, I think, to the day when I banished Earl's weapons from the school premises, and united against stern tyranny, the pair flourish. Before prayers this morning, as I was wondering if I could manage 5 flats in the morning hymn and dusting the yellow piano keys, I listened to their conversation. Eric was giving out hymn books, dropping them with a satisfying smack on each desk, as the rest of the class wandered in, deposited their 11s on the side table, or waited beside my desk with bunches of flowers or messages from their mothers. Earl trailed behind him, giving brief information about education in American schools. "We don't have all this," he said, touching a hymn book. "We have the pledge." "The what?" said Eric, stopping dead. "Like what you have in the Band of Hope?" "Don't know nothing about a Band of Hope," replied Earl. "The pledge is what we say every morning. We all look at the flag, our flag, stars and stripes, and promise to be real good Americans." Eric looked surprised and mildly disgusted. "You tells all that to a flag?" he inquired. Earl's good-natured face took on a perplexed expression. "It's the flag," he explained. "It's a real good flag with gold fringe and all." Eric's reply was crushing. "We got a flag too, but we don't keep all on about it." He resumed his hymn book slinging as though the matter were closed. Earl was not to be sidetracked. "Well, forget the flags," he said doggedly, "but we don't have hymns and prayers like you do. That's all I said. We just have this pledge, like I told you." Eric flicked the last hymn book onto the corner desk with a pretty turn of the wrist. Satisfied with the results, he dusted his hands down his shirt and explained the position succinctly to this stranger from another shore. "Well, that's all right where you come from, I don't doubt, but over here Miss Reed says we has a bit about God each morning, rain or shine, and a bit about God we has." Miss Clare invited me to her cottage for the evening. It only takes a few moments for me to drive the 2 miles between us. When she comes to me, she refuses to let me fetch her or run her home in the car, but cycles very slowly and as upright as ever on her venerable old bicycle. The cottage is a model of neatness. The roof was thatched by her father, who was the local thatcher for many years. She has an early flowering honeysuckle over her white trellis porch, and jasmine smothers another archway down the garden path. As usual, the best china, the snowiest cloth, and the most delicious supper awaited me. In the center of the table stood a cut glass vase of magnificent tulips, flanked by a cold brisket of beef on a willow-patterned dish garnished with sprigs of parsley from her garden and an enormous salad. The freshly plucked spring onions were thoughtfully but put separately in a little shallow dish. "It's not everyone that can digest them," said Miss Clare, crunching one with much enjoyment, "but my mother always said they were a wonderful tonic and cleared the blood after the winter." Miss Clare's silver was old and heavy and gleamed with recent cleaning. How she finds time to keep everything so immaculate, I don't know. Her house puts mine to shame, and she has no one to help her at all, whereas I do have Mrs. Pringle occasionally turning a disdainful hand to my affairs. After we had consumed an apple and blackberry pie, the fruits of Miss Clare's earlier bottling, we folded our yard-square napkins, which were stiff with starch and exquisitely darned here and there, and washed up in the long, low kitchen while the coffee heated on the Primus stove. Miss Clare's larder is one of the pleasantest places I know. It is a long, narrow room at the side of the kitchen and has a red brick floor and whitewashed walls. The wooden shelves have been scrubbed so often and so well that the grain stands out in fine ribs. From the ceiling hang ropes of bronze onions, dried herbs in muslin bags, and ham equally well draped, which I know her brother gave her at his last pig killing. Bottles of fruit, cherries, plums, blackberries, greengages, and gooseberries, and jars of jam and jelly flash like jewels as they stand in serried ranks, and on the floor stand bottles of homemade wine, dandelion, parsnip, sloe, and damson, beside 2 large crocks containing salted runner beans. How Miss Clare ever gets through these stores I don't know, for she has little time for entertaining and has her main meal at school more often than not. But as a true countrywoman, she bottles, preserves, salts, and stores all the good things that grow in her own garden and are given her by kindly neighbors, and would count it a disgrace not to have a larder well stocked for any emergency. That she is generous with her possessions, I do know from personal experience and from hearsay. No one goes away empty-handed, and I suspect that many of these bottles of fruit and wine will be carried away by visitors. Typical of her largeness of heart is the shilling, which always waits on the corner of the mantelpiece in the dining room. I keep one there for whoever calls, she told me. They are all treated the same: Salvation Army, soldiers and sailors, Roman Catholics, blind babies, Red Cross, and all the rest. When I think of Miss Clare's tiny pension and see how ready she is to give, not only these impartial shillings, but cakes to fetes and bazaars, knitting to raffles, gifts to sales of work and the like, and always unfailingly her time and the little store of strength to any good work in the village, I cannot help contrasting her attitude of mind with those of others among us, earning perhaps 5 times as much, who never give 1 penny, 1 minute, or 1 thought to others around them, but grab all and grumble because there isn't more. In the end, of course, it is Miss Clare who scores, for she, ipso facto, is a happy woman, while their treasure turns to dust and ashes. Mrs. Moffat has undertaken to make Amy's costume for the forthcoming county pageant. Bent, the village where Amy lives, has been lucky enough to draw the visit of Charles II and Queen Catherine of Braganza to Branscombe Castle for its part in the series. Amy is to play the Queen and is full of enthusiasm. Her handbag was crammed with patterns of silks, satins, lace, and brocade, and a number of small portraits of that royal lady culled from the postcard stands at the National Portrait Gallery to snippets from historical features in the back numbers of Everybody's. She had been to discuss the costume early in the afternoon and called at the school as we were about to go home. She smiled kindly upon Linda and took in with an expert's eye the cut of the tartan pinafore frock that Miss Moffat was wearing. "She's going to be a beauty," was her comment when the children had trickled out into the sunshine. "And with a mother like that to make her clothes, she's going to be a very lucky girl." She helped me stack away the paintings, which were draped around the room on the piano top, the fire guard, the side desk, window sills, anywhere, for that matter, where the masterpieces could have 10 minutes peace in which to dry, and rattled on excitedly about Mrs. Moffat's genius for dressmaking. 4 or 5 other members of Bent WI had also enlisted her services, one of whom was an authority on costume and had worked before her marriage as an advisor on historical costume to a film company. Amy had high hopes that she would take an especial interest in Mrs. Moffat's work and that this might lead to great things in the future for the Moffat-Finch-Edwards partnership. "And what might this be?" she inquired suddenly, holding up a damp painting by one corner. It was supposed to be Mr. Lamb at the post office unlocking the post box and taking out the letters. "But it's a lilac letter box," objected Amy. "There's not a spot of scarlet anywhere." "There's not a spot of scarlet in the whole wretched range of powder paint," I told her. "You can have anything from lime green to clover. We're all a bit greeny-yellowy these days." "We had 3 good fat squeezes of red, blue, and yellow, and when I was at school," said Amy, looking back across the years. "Primary colors, you know, and we made all the others from those 3. Much more fun than these myriad pots of depressing paint." She surveyed with dislike the large tray laden with jam jars of paint that stood on my desk. I heartily agreed and told her that in some painting lessons the children did exactly as she had done as a child, and that I believed they found mixing the colors more absorbing than slapping on those already done for them. "To have no really good red," mused Amy sadly as we locked up and went across to the schoolhouse. "How you manage these days when it comes to buses and mail vans and geraniums and poppies, I really can't think." I switched on the kettle and washed my hands at the kitchen sink. I was amused to see how seriously Amy had taken this art problem. Her troubled gaze was fixed unseeing on the garden. "Not to mention Chelsea pensioners and lobsters," she added. Mr. Maughan has paid us his long-awaited visit. The children were delighted to have someone fresh to listen to, and a few of Miss Clare's older children were allowed to come in with their elders to hear his talk on our local birds. He had some excellent colored pictures, some of which he had drawn and colored himself, and these he had very generously handed over to Fairacre School. He had to hurry away, as he had promised the vicar that he would help him with the church accounts after an early tea, but he met Mrs. Pringle as she was stumping in from the lobby with her broom. The arch smile that I was treated to, enhanced by the loss of her upper plate, broken earlier in the week, was so infuriating in its toad-like hideousness that I could cheerfully have floored her with my weighty inkstand. But, alas, common civility stayed my hand. "Real gentleman, that," was her comment as she watched his thin retreating back. "Wouldn't stop to tea, I'll be bound. Wouldn't want people to start talking." She bent, wincing, to pick up a milk straw from the floor. Her leg, I noticed, was dragging slightly as she limped toward the wastepaper basket. "Not," she went on, "that he'd take advantage of anyone." I could have wished that Mrs. Pringle had used a less dubious phrase. But, torn between amusement and irritation, I made my way to the house, there to order some films about birds for first Wednesday in June, then when the mobile film van pays us its next visit, to follow up poor misjudged Mr. Maughan's excellent discourse. This morning, while I was in the playground directing a litter collecting in an oddly unpleasant cold wind, Mrs. Partridge drew up in the ancient Ford. It was stuffed with spring cabbages, bunches of young carrots, spring onions, and lettuces, for Mrs. Partridge was on her way to Caxley to put her produce on the WI stall in the market. She told me that Mrs. Pratt's father had had a stroke the day before, and that Dr. Martin was afraid that he would be completely helpless, perhaps for many months. Mrs. Pratt had been obliged to give up the secretaryship of the WI, and would I be willing to take over if the members agreed to this proposition? I said cautiously that I would think about it and let her know tomorrow, but if the meetings were to be held, as they always have been, in the afternoons, it was, of course, out of the question. The vicar's wife said, "Oh, of course. How could I have forgotten? Well, we'll see what can be done. Perhaps Mrs. Moffat might consider it. Linda's at school in the afternoon." And with that, she drove off. I collected my class, who had tidied the playground with such zeal that Earl was now dusting the shoe scraper with his handkerchief, and we returned to the classroom, grateful to be out of the wind. As the children worked at their arithmetic, my mind wandered back to the problem of running village activities. In Fairacre, we managed fairly well, owing to the small number of clubs and so on, and to the hard work of Mr. and Mrs. Partridge, who were more than willing to undertake extra duties. But Beech Green, which is a much larger village and has a good bus service to Caxley, has great difficulty in finding people ready to take office in such things as their Women's Institute, the Scouts, and the Sports Club. The vicar shakes his mild old head about dwindling numbers there and comments sadly on the flourishing men's clubs, glee clubs, and the like, which had so many keen supporters 20 or more years ago. But then the buses to Caxley from Fairacre and Beech Green were non-existent, and the villagers were thrown on their own resources. Families were much larger, and there were more people to each age group than there are now. Bands of friends would join the appropriate activity and keep the thing going. Then, too, there were leisured people who willingly gave their time and money to support village affairs, who would come to the rescue when a financial crisis arose, who would lend houses and gardens generously and put their ideas and inspirations at the disposal of the village. This invaluable source of village richness now is no more. When I think of those on Fairacre's and Beech Green's various committees, I am struck by the fact that they are, in the main, outsiders and not natives to the village. Now, why is this? Does it mean that organized activities are not needed by those for whom they are intended? Or does it mean that newcomers to a village enjoy running things, harking back perhaps to their own childhood in other villages when such affairs were in their heyday? One thing committee members are united on. They lament the fact they get so little or no support from the bulk of the populace. Are they perhaps an anachronism in this transition period? Will organized activity come into its own again if and when the villages flourish again, when rural education is improved and the drift from the countryside is halted? That there is social intercourse is undeniable. We here in Fairacre are constantly visiting each other for tea parties, morning coffee, evenings at cards, or for watching television programs, and we are always ready to stop and have delicious, friendly gossips over our garden gates. The Beetle and Wedge is crowded nightly, and this is where the men really meet to exchange news and grumbles, or to relax after work. As P.G. Woodhouse truly says of the tap room, the rich smell of mixed liquors and the gay clamor of carefree men arguing about the weather, the government, the royal family, greyhound racing, the tax on beer, pugilism, religion, and the price of bananas. These things are medicine to the bruised soul. There is a natural disinclination to go out on wintry evenings, and in the summer our gardens occupy a major part of our time. Perhaps church-going, the visits to the pub, the occasional whist drive or fete, and the entertainment of neighbors is all that busy countrymen have time for at this stage of village life. With easy transport to Caxley and television in their own homes to supply entertainment, the people of our two villages certainly seem to find enough to occupy them, and whether one can expect large and flourishing clubs, admirable though they are, is a moot point. And we will fare further into village life next time.